Psalm 51, still. There's so much in this, so many ways to look at ourselves from kind of this vantage point of David's look into his own soul. Verse 4, against you and you alone have I sinned. This we already talked about this, but when this makes me think of the story of Joseph, or this part of the story of Joseph when he was in Potiphar's house he was the manager of all of Potiphar's affairs. And Potiphar's wife took a very significant liking, I guess I would say. She was hot for Joseph. Lured him into the bedroom, asked him to have his way with her. And what he said was, how could I sin against God and my master? When we realize that part of the nature of our sin, and the most significant part of it, is that we sin against him. When I sin against another person, I'm trying to think of a time when sinning against another person would not injure them in some way, not physically, maybe emotionally or spiritually. And is it possible that we injure God when we sin against him? Well, no. God can't be injured. He can't be God and be injurable. And yet, it is a disregard. David says it's rebellion. That's what he said in verse 3. I recognize my rebellion. And then he goes on in verse 4. I have done what is evil in your sight. Now, there is a difference between making a mistake of judgment and doing something evil. There may be a tiny difference in various circumstances, but there still is a difference. David identifies his sin as evil. We don't very often do that. Anyway, I don't. I mean, I sin. I'm like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that, or gee, come on, type thing, right? But I don't think of it as evil. Well, you know what? If I am in rebellion against God's design, it's evil. It's not just a oopsie. Okay, go on, Steve. And then he goes on to say, you will be proved right in what you say, and your judgment against me is just. This, I think what David is saying is, I have no defense. It would be silly for me to try to defend myself in this legal sense. I have nothing to stand on. I don't want to make too much of it, because there are people, there are lines of theology that do make too much of the fact that we have nothing to stand on. We we don't just kind of need a Savior. We really need a Savior. But if that's the entirety of my theological belief, that I'm just horrible, I am evil, I'm just bad. If that's it, if that's all I believe, that raises a lot of difficulties. First of all, for a lot of people who've come from that sort of religious background, in my experience, they have a whole lot of trouble believing that they would be a candidate for God's grace. They're too bad. They're they've gone too far. God's grace doesn't go that far. Well, yeah, it does. If I only see the depth of my sin, the depth of my brokenness, which is a very soft way of phrasing the depth of my evil. If that's all I see, I'm seeing less than half the picture. Because it's a tiny part. It is there, but it's not the whole picture. The rest of the picture, that in the big picture, is overwhelmed by God's grace. Now, let's look at the other side of that. If I don't take my own sin seriously, and I just, shrug it off, I think I cheapen God's grace. You see, grace didn't cost me anything, but it cost Jesus his life. And it wasn't like he just, a car wreck and he was snuffed out, or, this was an agonizing death that he, and we, okay, I can make much of it, but I'll just say his death, part of, in my opinion, what made it so agonizing was obviously the physical pain of the torture. The second thing would have been the sin of all people of all time that he carried on the cross. And I just thought, but I wonder if a third thing would be knowing that he could have called a legion of angels. They would have taken him off the cross, and they could have easily slaughtered the enemies of God's plan of Jesus. But he knew he couldn't do that and redeem us. Okay. Sin is real. Our sin is real. And there are always reasons, but there are no excuses. And what David is saying is, I had no excuse. If the Bible you're looking at has footnotes, you probably realize that you see a footnote there for verse 4 that ours says, you will be proved right in what you say, and your judgment against me is just. Well, the Greek version reads, and you will win your case in court. In other words, I got nothing. I'd have to plead guilty, which is essentially what David does. In fact, he goes back to pre-birth in verse 5, for I was born a sinner. Yes, from the moment my mother conceived me. All right, there's two things there. I'll talk, they're equally controversial, okay? The first thing I'm going to talk about is that from the moment my mother conceived me is theologically and hermeneutically, it's very difficult to not get the fact that David was an entity from the moment of his conception. Other things have, taken over the headlines than the abortion debate. And the law was changed. But there's still a raging battle. I don't know where you come down on, is abortion legitimate, allowable? or not. And obviously, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a clinician in that sense. I don't have the training in the background to be able to say according to all the research I've done, but I will say, to me, the moment of conception is the moment of life. And to abort an unborn baby, for me, is the taking of a life. There's thousands of pages have been written. And as I said, the debate rages as to when does life begin? A second piece of it is there are Christians who do love God who do not agree with my view of abortion. So I'm not gonna build a case for debate here. I'm just gonna say David understood himself to have been an entity, a person, from the moment his mother conceived him. All right. Now the other phrase, for I was born a sinner. There is considerable debate regarding were we born carrying the penalty for sin? Were we born sinners? When are we capable of sin? That's a whole big deal. All right, I'm going to just share my thought. I was born capable of sin. I would even say I was born with a propensity to sin. But I don't have any memory of my own first sin. But I do have experience with our three daughters as they grew, and I know that they were capable of doing wrong from an early age. Understanding the difference between right and wrong, well, that took a little longer. And understanding the nature of sin, that took even longer. All of us were born with this brokenness in us. We are not just capable of sin, but we are often attracted to sin, and that has to be dealt with. Did David believe he was literally a sinner from the moment he was conceived? He might have. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's the point he was trying to make. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. I think what he was trying to say was, my sin is consistent with my nature, just as my sin is consistent with my nature. Against you and you alone have I sinned. I've done what is evil in your sight. You will be proved right in what you say, and your judgment against me is just. For I was born a sinner, just from the moment my mother conceived me. There is a reality of my behavior, and there is a reality of my nature. Well, I think I probably provoked more questions than giving answers today. I think I'm okay with that. I'll see you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.